All right, good afternoon. My name is Antonio Napoleon. I am the school principal. I am pleased to introduce our assistant principal, Jessica Leon, right next to me. Let's give her a round of applause, Jessica. She's awesome. We would like to welcome each of you to our school as we are here this afternoon to name our school library after the late U.S. Representative John Lewis. As a school principal many years ago, I remember when Mr. DePasqua, Ms. Sikowski, and our students were Skyping with Congressman Lewis in our multipurpose room. As part of a unit, they were studying about the civil rights movement. During their meeting, Congressman Lewis shared his thoughts about race and humanity, with an overarching theme of never giving up on changing and improving our society. Later, our students took a trip to Washington, D.C., where the congressman took time to meet with them despite his busy and hectic schedule. And Triopia was there along with them at that meeting. That is the kind of person Congressman Lewis was, standing up for equality, justice, and freedom, and creating opportunities to share that passion with kids. It is with great honor that we bestow Congressman Lewis's name on our library as a daily reminder for all of us at CREC to continue his important work. And now I am pleased to introduce CREC's Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Sasha Douglas.
Thank you, Tony and Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It is a good afternoon. So I am pleased and honored to be a part of this celebration today. Those of you who are in the space know what the transformation of this mural behind me and this space has done for this beautiful library here at Montessori Magnet School. And you also know, whether you are already a part of the Montessori community or whether you're an honored or invited guest today, how important the legacy of Congressman John Lewis is to the Montessori school. We have students who are now in high school who can look back and think about that direct personal contact and the way he took his time to pour into them, and hopefully his legacy will embolden them and encourage them to pour into generations to come. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm so happy to see a full house and see the faces of students and educators and community members and parents who share the value of our time today. We are going to start, we're going to open today with our land acknowledgement. If you're not familiar with a land acknowledgement, it's a way of acknowledging that the land that we stand on, this building, this library, was stewarded, was owned by people before us, and just by recognizing that and calling that into the space. And so our correct acknowledgement is on the screen. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the ancestral territory of the Tungsis, Sikog, Pocumtuck, Wagunk, Pokanook, Podunk, Quinnipiac, Massaco, and Hammonasset peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We also acknowledge the 5 state and federally recognized tribal nations that exist in Connecticut today: the Mashantucket Pequot, Mohegan, Golden Hill Pigusset, Eastern Pequot, and Schaghticoke people. We support their sovereignty as tribal nations now and into the future. I would now like to welcome up our Superintendent of CREC Magnet Schools, Tim Sullivan.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Today is a big day for this school and for our larger community. And before we go any further, I just want to take a moment and say thank you to Heather and Joe, without whom none of this would have been possible. Every once in a while, when you are in a position of authority, you have people that poke and prod, and Joe is that guy for me. And I know that's because Heather's standing behind him, poking and prodding him. But their energy and their effort on doing what they thought was right for kids and right for our community is unwavering. And we have to be very thankful just to have them as part of our organization. And for those of us that have sent our children to Montessori, including myself, to be lucky enough to have them be educators in the midst of our children. So thank you. So my order of business is to do an introduction, but before I get to that, I just want to say how important this is to me personally. When I was a teacher at Weaver High School, I taught African American history and U.S. history, and John Lewis was at the center of so much of that history. I remember going back to the old videotapes and seeing him as a young person and the work that he did and how many generations of young people he's inspired. And this mural will make sure that his ripple effect never dies. That people come in and ask questions about this mural, they'll ask questions about the naming of the library, and generations after generations of young people will have an opportunity to learn more about him and his legacy and all the good stuff that he gave us. So I just want to say that out loud and make sure that we're all aware of how important this is for the ripple effect it will have for generations to come. Finally, I get to introduce somebody who I consider to be a friend. He has been a major factor, a major player in the city that I live in, the city of Hartford, for several years. I first heard his name probably before most of you did when my mom came home from a library meeting and said, hey, I met this guy and I think he's going to be great for our city. And who knows, maybe someday he'll run for office. And sure enough, Luke Bronin put his name in the hat for mayor, won re-election. If you read in the paper today, he has almost single-handedly turned around the financial projections for our city and make sure that we're on stable fiscal ground. He builds bridges with other communities. He builds bridges at the state, and he used those bridges to get things done for people. And I think that's really in line with everything that John did. So with no further ado, I'd like to call up Luke Bronin.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for that incredibly kind introduction, and principal and assistant principal, and to all of the CREC team and the Montessori team, and all of the guests and honored guests who are here today. It is really a privilege to be with you to celebrate this dedication. This is a beautiful space, first of all, and it brings me such joy just to know that all of the kids who are in this school will be able to pass through this space every day and see this beautiful mural here, and to know that it is a space that's been dedicated to a man who's among the greatest of Americans ever to live. And hopefully for many kids, it'll prompt them to ask the question, who was John Lewis? So that they can learn and then pass that on. I remember seeing John Lewis talk one time about being denied entry to a library, being denied a library card when he was 16 years old. And that was among the experiences, among the many experiences that for him moved him to fight for change. And I also saw him talk about the power of a library once he did gain entry, and the world of knowledge and of role models that it exposed him to. And it was an incredibly powerful testimony, both of those things. And so what a beautiful thing that this library is dedicated in his name, that every child who comes here will have that gift of being able to access knowledge, to explore, to learn, to pull a book off the shelf, to discover some things that they didn't know, to pursue their passions, maybe to find some things that make them uncomfortable but make them break new ground, and to do it all in a space that's dedicated to men who will hopefully also inspire them to use whatever knowledge they gain here to join that broader fight for justice and for moving our society closer to our aspirations. So it is it's an incredible testimony, I think, to the spirit and the heart of the team at this school and to CREC as a whole, that you embrace this dedication. And it's also a tremendous honor to have so many people who I know you're going to hear from today who have been a part of spreading the message and the work of John Lewis so that others could learn and grow from it. So I'm really grateful to have been included today. I'm incredibly proud, and what a gift to our city and to the kids who come here every day. Thank you.
I'm excited because we're going to hear from probably the most important speakers that we'll hear from when we're gathered today. So who are the most important people in a school building? The students. So I would like our Montessori students who are going to be speaking to come on down to the stage. I'd like you to join me. Rochelle Kaya, Avian Martinez, Nova Miles, Emma Pafundi, Aditya Patania, Amelia Rivera, Amar Spence, Amaryllis Vasquez, and Kayana Ilanis Soler. Come on down. So I'm going to ask, step up to the mic when it's your turn. They're going to tell us what the library means to them.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aditya Patania, and me and my friends are here to tell you about John Lewis and the library.
I'm Nova Miles.
And I'm Amaryllis Vasquez.
We know that John Lewis stood for civil rights, and because of that, we know that the fact that our library is named after him is such a privilege.
It is up to us to read books and learn as much as we can so that we can make change in the world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Amar Spence, and I'm honored to be representing Montessori Middle School students today in our John Robert Lewis Library. John Lewis sacrificed so much for us to be here and make education more accessible for children. What I like most about John Lewis is that he's still up for people who can stand up for themselves. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rochelle Kaya.
And I'm Amelia Rivera.
Today we would like to say how thankful we are for the recent changes to the library. For example, the library has more shelving than before, and it is easy for us to find books.
We feel more welcome to explore and spend time reading.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emma Pafundi. As a sixth grader at this school, I have been a student here for the past 9 years. Seeing this new library, I love how it looks beautiful and lively. I see the youngest children able to look for books now because the shelves are the right size for them. The little nooks and reading areas are what I love most because they're welcoming and inspire me to read. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kayana Ilana Soler. Our new library commemorates John Lewis. To me, it teaches young children that everyone's voice matters and we can all make change in the world. In the social justice section, there are books about people you most likely did not know about before, such as Sharice Davids, Wilma Mankiller, and Fannie Lou Hamer, just to name a few. Want to know who they are? You can read about them in the social justice section. You might ask, where is the social justice section? Well, it's right over there, next to that house. When children read books in that section, they know their voice can make a difference. You might also be wondering, why is there a house there? Maybe because it's Monty, our panda mascot's home? No. It's because it's something John Lewis said. We are one people, we are one family, we are one house. That's why there's a house, to represent that we're all one. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Avian Martinez. As you can see, we are very excited about our new library, and I want to thank CREC for making this happen.
So that was definitely the best part. Because I think there is, for us as adults, the symbolism of the library, but I think to hear from the students that get to experience the space every day, thinking about everything from the shelving to the layout to the choice of books and the legacy. I think it's just inspiring to hear what it means to them. We are now going to watch a video that was shared with us by our U.S. Secretary of Education, who is also from our own state of Connecticut. as a tribute and a recognition of the work that has happened here at Montessori Magnet School and the significance of the dedication today of the library. So if you could turn your eyes to the screen, we're going to be hearing from Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona.
Hi, I'm U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona. I want to thank my good friend Jessica Otero Leon for inviting me today to share a few words. I also want to say hello to my friends Greg Florio, Executive Director, and Superintendent Sullivan. It's an honor to have this opportunity to congratulate the Capital Regional Education Council on renovating this library, and especially for naming it after one of the great civil rights leaders of our history, Congressman John Lewis. Renovating a library symbolizes something we need to see a lot more of in our nation, not being satisfied with normal. Here, you saw how things could be better and you got it done. That's really impressive at a time in this country where some are banning books. You're increasing access to books. The truth is, in this country today, so many problems come to this. We know what the problem is. We even have the expertise to fix it, but we lack willpower to make the change we all know needs to happen. So when I think of Congressman John Lewis, I think of his admonition, if not us, who? And if not now, when? You see, he understood that we can't stand around waiting for someone else to challenge a broken status quo. We are the change makers. So to all who will benefit from this renovated library, I hope that when you're in this space, you think of Congressman John Lewis. And I hope when these books spark an idea about something that can be better, not only in you, but in your community, in your state of Connecticut, or in our country, you don't just leave that idea behind in the library. Instead, ask yourself, if not us, who? And if not now, when? And then go out and be the change. I know you will. Congratulations and thank you.
When the U.S. Secretary of Education takes time to send a message, you know we're doing important work. It's my pleasure to introduce Triopia Washington. Triopia Green Washington is an educator and speaker with experience in program and partnership development, cultural competency, and community outreach. A Baltimore kindergarten teacher for many years, an early childhood advocate, she is passionate about sharing her experiences growing up in segregation during the Jim Crow era. As Director of Special Initiatives in the College of Education at Bowie State University, Triopia enjoys working with faculty, staff, and students on a wide array of programs. Previously, she served as Vice President of Partnerships and Minority Affairs at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards and as a professional appointee to the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. She is a proud HBCU graduate of Hampton University and has a Master's in Education degree from Johns Hopkins University. Please join me in welcoming Triopia Green Washington.
It is my honor to be a part of this extraordinary experience. I have been asked to read an essay that I did about John Lewis. I named it John Lewis, the Gentle Giant, and it was written shortly after he passed. Last week marked the passing of a true hero, a gentle giant whose imprint on this country far exceeded his physical size. Congressman Lewis was linked with my family in many ways. Those links are directly related to my brother, Ernest Green, and his experiences as one of the Little Rock Nine. These were the 9 students who successfully, through pain and anguish, integrated Little Rock Central High School in 1957. Ernest was the only senior among the 9 and thus, at the end of that horrific year, became Central High's first black graduate. Ernest met John Lewis during the 60s civil rights struggle. Mr. Lewis, whose experiences are well documented, told Ernest that he was inspired by the endurance and fortitude demonstrated by Ernest. During the 1957 integration crisis at Central High School, in 2007, during the 50th anniversary celebration of the 1957 integration crisis, the National Park Service dedicated the new Little Rock Central High School historic site. The keynote speaker for this dedication of this new museum, Congressman John Lewis. Fast forward to the spring of 2019, I received a call from a Hartford, Connecticut teacher, Joe DePasqua, whom I remember talking with at the 60th anniversary celebration of the 57 crisis in 2017. He explained that 6 of his middle school students were entering the National History Contest. These students from the Montessori Magnet School were Cerise Noyes, Walter Vallicello, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing them correctly, and McKenna Soriano, who is here today. Raise your hand. The others were Marlon Boyaccio and Luis Nunez. Their topic, the Little Rock Central High 1957 integration crisis. They wanted to interview me. Of course, I was delighted to help. After several telephone discussions, this originally dramatization called Paying a Price for Education was completed. The entry won first place in the Hartford, Connecticut contest. Next, it won second place in the Connecticut State contest, which qualified them to enter the National History Contest. The competition was held that summer at the University of Maryland. The really exciting news, however, was an invitation from Congressman John Lewis to perform the entry for him at his office. I was invited with my son to attend the event as special guests. On the day of the presentation, Congressman Lewis arrived at his office after casting a vote in the House of Representatives. He then invited us into his conference room. Truly memorable was his command to his entire staff to stop whatever they were doing and come to the presentation. Several staffers mentioned work that needed to be done, but the congressman insisted that this was more important and was something they needed to learn about. The students did an awesome job. In fact, almost brought me to tears. After the production, we were invited to take several pictures with Congressman Lewis. I will treasure mine forever. The congressman then inquired about my brother, Ernest, and asked that I let him know that he asked about him. John Lewis was truly a gentle giant. I will always remember him as one whose humility and grace are as memorable as his outstanding contributions to the pursuit of equity and equality for all the citizens of the United States. And in addition, without boring you further, I have a note from my brother, Ernest Green, and it reads like this. Dear Joe, congratulations for your work in establishing this library in honor of Congressman John Lewis, one of the greatest Americans ever. I am also grateful to you for coming to Little Rock to attend several of the anniversary events commemorating the 1957 integration crisis at Little Rock Central High School. Your interest encouraged your students to develop the prize-winning play, Paying a Price for Education. Please accept my sincere thanks for all you are doing and will continue to do. Ernest Green, Little Rock 9. Thank you.
I think just listening to that, the combination of history and legacy and students bringing that to life and paying it forward and bringing us today is something that is so moving. Thank you so much, Triopia, for sharing that and being here with us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce Nate Powell. Nate is a National Book Award-winning cartoonist who began self-publishing comics as an Arkansas teenager in 1992. His work includes numerous graphic essays and memoirs, horror tales, comic essays, and graphic novels. Nate's work also received a Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, 4 Eisner Awards, 2 Ignatz Awards, multiple American Library Association and YALSA distinctions, and the Comic-Con International Inkpot Award. He has discussed his work at the United Nations, as well as on MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show, CNN, PBS, and Free Speech TV. His forthcoming graphic novel, Fall Through, will be released by Abrams Comics in February of 2024, followed by a comic adaptation of James Lewin's influential Lies My Teacher Told Me. Welcome, Nate.
Hey y'all, how's it going? Wow, I'll keep it short and sweet. Still, it's a little overwhelming, just kind of still absorbing the magnitude and just the good feeling of all of this. From walking in here this morning and sort of absorbing everything, looking at every detail of this library and the amount of just mindfulness put into how to transform the space, having never been in the library before, yet understanding what it means, and especially affirmed by what your students were saying about the new use of space in here. It's just kind of hitting me like a ton of bricks. And, you know, for Andrew and I, as a part of our lives, for the rest of our lives, to help prop up Congressman Lewis's legacy and his memory, and to help protect that legacy, and to continue to show up because he is no longer with us. What really hit me in terms of what Congressman Lewis would be so moved by was, I was checking everything out, and all of a sudden seeing over the library desk, and then just behind it to the side, this blown up panel from March Book 1, which was the last panel that that we put into the book before printing it, which was a special detail from his elementary school days of his school librarian, Colleen Harvey, and her open house command to read, my child, read everything. And then going from that and realizing that it was printed with such class and grace and power over the circulation desk of the library itself, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that was put into March Book 1 as a significant detail that helped tie together sort of the proof of concept that Congressman Lewis saw and that we saw by making these books happen, but recognizing the power of ideas to change and the power of books to contain those ideas, the power of possibility. That would have brought him to tears instantly. And it's just such a thoughtful detail. Also, we lost Congressman Lewis a little over 3 years ago, and that was in that awful first year of the pandemic, where not only had so many of us lost space, shared public space for grieving with each other, but lost a sense of what this kind of shared community space can be and all the roles it plays in our lives. So finally, I don't leave the house much, as you can guess, I make comics, and I have 2 kids. So it's incredibly meaningful to all of us, and I speak for Congressman Lewis when I talk about the impact of making space for history, making sure voices are heard, making sure people are not swept under the rug, making sure that people have the tools they need at all age levels, at all levels of ability, to be able to process the world around them, where we've all come from, where we are and where we're going. This is stuff I spend a lot of time thinking about with my 8-year-old and my 11-year-old and sort of equipping them as they've rapidly grown into this even more rapidly shifting world. So thank you to all of you here, to all of you at this school for really helping prop up these tools of society, these tools of democracy, and just really, these tools which allow us to follow our curiosities, to learn, to grow, to change, and for the students of the school to discover who it is they want to be, to discover in a more full sense who they are and what to do with that sense of empowerment. Libraries are at the center of all of that. So I'm going to leave it at that. But it is an immense honor to be here and to show up for Congressman Lewis for this incredible display of a mass people's movement for which he was one young person at and near the center. And I guess my last note is understanding that John Lewis, throughout our work on March, was very focused on addressing some of the long-term shortcomings and failures of teaching about civil rights movement history. And one of those was all of us being used to sort of a simplified, one-dimensional, hierarchical version of civil rights movement history. And a lot of that doesn't make sense for the sake of convenience. And so John Lewis, as a part of SNCC and as a part of the young people's wing of the movement, was always a very firm believer in decentralized power and decentralized movements, in actual power to and of the people. And so it's very important that he would recognize that he was one of hundreds of thousands of dedicated people who helped make this change happen. One young person at the center of that movement, yes, but the civil rights movement was a movement of the people from the ground up. And let's always remember that as we remember all of our power that we have individually and together. Thanks.
Nate's work is prominently featured in the Montessori John Lewis Library Social Justice section. So check that out and be sure to check out a copy of his work. It's now my pleasure to introduce Paul Mounds. Paul Mounds Jr. has 2 decades of experience serving as a trusted advisor to high-level elected officials and C-suite executives in government, business, nonprofit, and higher education entities, with demonstrated success in elevating and transforming the profiles, productivity, and effectiveness of organizations and their leadership. Paul is a graduate of Trinity College and previously served as the Chief of Staff for the Office of Governor Ned Lamont. His current position is as Vice President of Community and Corporate Alliances for the Yale New Haven Health System. Paul, welcome up.
Thank you. Just look at that. I just want everyone to take a moment and just look at what you see here and look around here. When I was growing up, born in Hartford on Vine Street, and then growing up in East Hartford, the safe spaces for me as a kid was my bedroom with a book, Hockney Elementary Library, East Hartford Middle School Library, and the Raymond Library in East Hartford, Connecticut. Those were my safe spaces. Those were the spaces where I can be able to grow, learn, and also to understand what it means to be a black man in America. It was also in a library that I met Andrew Iden. Andrew and I were graduates of Trinity College. We were classmates. We were political science majors. We were in the same study groups. He preferred to talk about comic books the whole time. But it was also Andrew, that not many people know, who it makes a lot of sense that he worked for Congressman John Lewis. Andrew was the reason why the Trinity College Library became a 24-hour library for students. Andrew organized a sit-in. And for a college student to organize a sit-in when you can be doing other things in college, it says a lot. But I was there with him for the cause. So it's just great that for these children, for the teachers, Joe and Heather, you guys are amazing. You guys just are amazing for what you are doing here today. As you heard from my lengthy bio that I never like anyone to read, I was lucky enough to be the first ever person of color to be a chief of staff for a governor in the Constitution state. And I knew there was a responsibility and importance to that. And I kept a few things in my office. And one of the things I did keep in my office was the March book. Not only because of my friend, because of what John Lewis meant to me. We all know about Bloody Sunday, and it occurred on March 7th. Another thing occurred on March 7th, later down the road, my birth. I was born on March 7th. My parents spoke about John Lewis and what John Lewis meant to our nation, what he meant for equality, what he meant for voting rights, and why it was always good to create good trouble to be able to make change. I had the great pleasure of interacting with John Lewis many of times during my times of working for Congressman John Larson as his press secretary. One of the most poignant things that I know if Congressman Larson was here today and he wanted me to be able to tell this story when I spoke to him was that it was right before the vote, and Andrew knows this, right before the vote for the Affordable Care Act. There's a lot of people out on the mall, a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, loud. The members of Congress were all in the caucus room wondering whether or not they should walk underneath the building to get to the Capitol so they can take the people's vote. And Ms. Green Washington says something that was so poignant, talking about a gentle giant that he is. I would also add that he was the tallest man in every room he was ever in. And he stood up, and everyone quiet down. And he said, we're not going to walk underneath. We're going to walk outside, and we're going to walk across. And you can always, anyone can look up that photo of Congressman Larson with John Lewis, with Nancy Pelosi, with Steny Hoyer, and the whole Democratic caucus walking across to say that we want to make a vote for affordable care and health care for the people of the United States of America. It was John Lewis who made that happen. So for everyone here, this is an honor. It's a blessing that we honor the legacy of this amazing man who's done so much in my life and so much in everyone's life. But the beauty of someone's legacy is that it should never die. John Lewis is alive in every single one of us. And I want to just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you everyone for being here. And I want to thank my dear friend Andrew. And I want to thank his partner Nate for ensuring that John Lewis's legacy and what he's meant for people such as myself, to ensure that it's not important just to be the first in anything in life. You want there to be many afterwards. So thank you. The good governor, my former boss, even though I don't work for him anymore, he still makes me work for him. I was not able to be here today. He loved John Lewis, loved him dearly. He wanted me to present a proclamation to the school that can be here forever. I'm not going to read the whole thing in honor for our agenda, but I'll just read a portion of it. Whereas throughout his life, Congressman Lewis focused on ensuring our nation and our world would be places where every child and every citizen were endowed and protected with inalienable rights and liberties, and served as teacher of the importance of nonviolence methods to fight for what is right, to enforce institutional change of our important institutions, as shown with the dedication of a new library in his honor at the CREC Montessori Magnet School. Therefore, I, Edward Minor Lamont, Governor of the state of Connecticut, in tribute to and in celebration of his remarkable life and accomplishments, on this day of Wednesday, October 18th, 2023, do hereby officially convey honor and recognition upon the U.S. Congressman John Robert Lewis Memorial Library at CREC Montessori Magnet School here in the great state of Connecticut.
Thank you so much, Paul, and to Governor Lamont in absentia for honoring the library in that way. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that I don't have a long introduction for Andrew Iden, but as we recognize the work of March, the work you see on the wall, and the power that you see behind me of visual imagery and bringing history to life and really keeping history alive in our minds. He's going to come up and speak to us, so welcome, Andrew.
Joe, we did it. No, Joe, I love you. And I love Heather, and I love everything you guys have done. So here's what you got to understand, right? Well, let me start at the beginning. Okay, I grew up in Atlanta. My father was a Turkish Muslim immigrant. I grew up basically poor, is a nice way to put it. My mother would say we were 99-cent Whopper poor because the only time we got to go out to eat was when Whoppers were on sale for 99 cents at Burger King. Growing up, when your father leaves, you think it's your fault. You think you did something wrong. And when your father's a Turkish Muslim, you think you really screwed up. Because the way people look at you, the way people treat you, I mean, I carry the name of a man I did not know. Iden was my father's name. It symbolizes and means things. It is on these books and means something that I do not understand because I never experienced it, I never lived with it. I was raised by a single mother at a time when women were barely able to have a bank account. They couldn't get a mortgage. And that was my experience of growing up. That was the world I saw. I did not have the luxury of not being political because politics dominated everything in our survival. And the way I dealt with that was by reading comics. They were an escape. They helped me feel empowered. And my mother was okay with it to a certain extent. My mother preferred the other things in the library, but it was a happy compromise. My mother, you have to understand, was the kind of person who loved the library so much. She had a library card for herself. She had a library card for me. And she would request all the books you can, right? The librarians in the room know that person, right? You get 10 requests. She had the whole list full. If she could have gotten a library card to fill up for the dog, she would have. And every week she came in, she traded them out. And my mother always had a stack of books beside her bed and would let me choose. And when I wasn't reading something, she would tell me the most salacious details of the book to try and get me to read them, whatever it took. And that shaped everything in my life. Because I was reading, because I had access to books. And eventually I became one of those readers who was reading things you really shouldn't have been reading. Like I was reading John Grisham in the 4th grade, which is really hard to explain to your 4th grade teacher why you're into legal thrillers. But that's why this would make my mother so proud. My mother passed away about 3 years before the congressman. I had a rough couple of years. They may have mentioned I went to school across the street. Paul and I both went to Trinity on scholarships. For the students in the room, remember this. Earn that scholarship. Fight for it. And when you go to school, fight for the people who are like you. Because then you get to be the people on stage, running the stage. You get to be the people who can do the remarkable things. Because that's how you survived. It was at Trinity that I learned how to build things from nothing. Just a brief story. We had something called the Student Activities Fund. In fact, some of my friends from college who helped me take it over are in the room. And we took that money that was typically divvied up, the wealthier kids, they would spend it on things like wine club. No, that was we defunded that. Congress should take note. And we built a television station with that money instead. And we used that television station to get press passes to go to the very first New York Comic-Con, where I got to meet a lot of these creators who I then later hit up being like, hey, I have an idea, on John Lewis's behalf. And yes, it is true. At Trinity, well, look, the scholarship dorms that they give you are tiny. And you have seen, Paul and I, we are not. So if I wanted to be able to study, if I wanted to be able to place where I could spread out my books or have any sort of comfort, or also access to a printer, because ink was expensive, right? They don't give you a scholarship budget for ink. We had to be in the library. And they closed the library at 11 o'clock. And the assumption was, I remember sitting down with the president at the time, the assumption was everybody else had a place to go. Why are you fussing? And I was like, 'cause I'm poor. And I said it to his face. We forget, we don't want to talk about what it is to be poor. We don't want to talk about what that means, how much help you need just to get by. And to be honest, that is what John Lewis and I had in common. We both grew up poor. And we forget how poor John Lewis was. As he would say, he grew up in a shotgun house. And what that meant in the most nonviolent sense of the word, that's how he would say it, is that you could bounce a basketball through the front door and it would go out the back. It was a shotgun shack. I didn't live in a shack, but that's what John Lewis grew up with. And we don't talk about how unlikely, how difficult, how remarkable it was that he was able to work his way all the way up. He did not go to a fancy college like Trinity College. He went to American Baptist Theological Seminary. It was a 2-year school. He worked scrubbing dishes to pay for it. We won't get into student loan debt today. His tuition was $300 a semester. Just point that out. And what we have to talk about now is what spaces like this represent to the students. This is one more way where we make it possible for those of us who are born less fortunate to succeed, to be like John Lewis. And we do a disservice to John Lewis's memory by thinking that this was linear, that John Lewis just kept going up and up and up. The truth is, he had ups and downs, and what his greatest skill was the ability to reinvent, the ability to change directions, to see that things were changing, and how could he help and how could he be a part of it. Think about it in his own life. By 1966, John Lewis was thought of as out of touch by the movement, not radical enough. Just 3 years prior, Bob Novak had called him everything. The article I said after they announced the Mississippi Freedom Summer, they said Bob Novak, who, if you remember, was on Crossfire, which is the show that, if you know Jon Stewart, that he single-handedly eliminated by destroying Tucker Carlson, also a Trinity student, live on air. I mean, just wrecked him. It was beautiful, right? And put Bob Novak out of a job. But in 1964, Bob Novak was a columnist, and he wrote in response to John Lewis's speech announcing the Mississippi Freedom Summer that he may not be a communist, but he sure sounds like one. And just 2 years after that, the movement itself thought he was not radical enough. And he was considered square, out of touch. He wore his ties. And so he reinvented himself. He went into politics. He worked for Robert Kennedy. And over and over and over again in his life, he reinvented himself. And I got to be a part of one of those reinventions. It was the summer of 2008. I had joined the congressman's staff the year before, answering his mail. As my mother said, I answered a lot of Dear John letters. Yeah, let that set in. I miss my mom. And I'd gotten good at answering his letters such that he asked me to join his campaign. And 2008 was the first time he'd had a re-election campaign in almost a decade. Right? It was a low point. This was tough. People did not know what John Lewis's contributions were. They'd forgotten. We use this symbol of the bridge, and we talk about Bloody Sunday, but we don't talk about the sit-in movement or the Freedom Rides. We don't talk about how the Freedom Rides led to the March on Washington's success, because you could not bring 100,000 people to Washington if the buses were segregated. We don't explain how the movement built upon itself. We just look at these symbols, these single moments, and then we boil them down and we turn them into Disney rides and we move on. And so at that point, I remember we were having these really tough conversations. How do we tell John Lewis's story? How do we help this generation understand who he is and what he did? And there's some politics going on the side too. And I remember sitting in these meetings and they all had the same idea. They wanted to do a documentary. Bless their hearts. There's been a lot of John Lewis documentaries. And I remember my first idea was, well, let's get him online. So I've got him on social media. And that was weird. Explaining Twitter to John Lewis was not the easiest thing. But he loved the fact that you could interact directly. He loved the fact, what are they saying now, young man? And I'd show him. He'd be like, that's just amazing to me if we'd only had that tool during the movement. And for those of you who don't know, that's kind of where Good Trouble came from, because I started that as a hashtag because every superhero needs a catchphrase, but I'm getting ahead of myself. And so as that campaign wore on, and I got to, look, the congressman was my congressman since I was 3 years old. I grew up in Atlanta. I thought I knew about the movement. But the more time I spent with John Lewis, the more time I thought about how I'd actually been lied to. I was told the story of gods and kings. It was Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X versus LBJ and JFK. I did not learn, I was not taught what it was that the young people did in the civil rights movement. I was not taught about their power. I was not taught that, for instance, the reason that age and residency are the only requirements to vote is because of the young people of SNCC who were vehemently pushing against that as early as the Civil Rights Act of '64. Because originally they were going to require that you have a 6th grade education. It was the radicalism of young people that pushed for and made possible this fundamental reform that we all take for granted. And no one had taught me. And frankly, I was angry at that. Why was I not taught this? I was having protests in college. I needed to know the rest. And so it was coming down to the end of the campaign, and we were talking about what we were going to do after. And I said I was going to a comic book convention. And everybody in that room laughed at me. Except for one person, it was John Lewis. He said, don't laugh, there was a comic book during the movement, and it was deeply influential. It was called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. And I remember just being amazed. This is my childhood meeting my adulthood, right? I went home that night, I looked it up on the internet, it's beautiful. 16 pages cover to cover, 1950s studio house style, an introduction to Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycotts, Gandhi and nonviolent civil disobedience. And I remember just sitting there thinking, with all these things swirling around in my head, about why I hadn't been taught about the role of young people, and how do we tell John Lewis's story. And I remember just sitting there thinking, well, you know, John Lewis should write a comic book. Which is probably not the idea anyone else would have had. But to me, it seemed almost self-evident. That was the move. That's what he should do. And so I went back to work, we had another one of those meetings, and this time I spoke up. I raised my hand like I was still in school. I mean, I was a 23-year-old press secretary in a congressional race, right? Like I knew I was in over my head. But I said, Congressman, I think you should write a comic book. A reporter later asked the congressman, what did you think when that young man suggested that you write a comic book? The congressman leaned in and he goes, I thought that boy had lost his mind. But I wouldn't give up on the idea. And I kept asking. Finally, we were campaigning over off the side of Wallace Road in southwest Atlanta near the congressman's house. And there's only two things John Lewis was afraid of: thunderstorms and snakes, because both will kill you in rural Alabama. And so we were there hammering in yard signs when a flash of lightning flashes in the sky. And I look up, and before the thunder actually rolled, John Lewis, in a full suit and tie at 68 years of age, had taken off at a full sprint back to the car. And we followed behind him, we dove into the car. There were 7 of us in a 5-seater. And the rain started to patter, patter, patter down on the roof. And one of the interns said, you should ask him about that comic book idea. He can't go anywhere now. And I said, okay, Congressman, I think you should write a comic book. And I'll never know why he changed his mind, but my belief was always that it was his wife. Because you see, his wife was a librarian. She understood. And so he said, okay, I'll do it, but only if you write it with me. And that moment changed my life. So he spent the next 5 years trying to make a comic book. You got to understand, you be the 25, 26 by the time we got out into the world on this. Be that kid going to major New York publishers saying, I think the congressman should write a comic book. It was absurd. I was laughed at. They thought it was ridiculous. Everybody said no. Until I found a publisher with 4 people, including the warehouse guy, who then introduced us to Nate, and we were off to the races. And you don't understand, too, like, for a congressman to do this, there was so much hesitation, so much hand-wringing, but he would not let that stop. He would not let it stop him. He would not let him stop us. We actually had to make a legal precedent in Congress to get a contract signed to publish a comic book. Because there was this, we're going to get into Newt Gingrich and how he really messed up the rules in the House. But we had to get it approved because there's a standard legally that a contract for a member of Congress has to be normal and customary. And they thought at first that a comic book was not normal and customary. But thankfully, because of some lawyers in the House who believed very strongly in the idea, we actually created a legal precedent just to get this thing through. I mean, that's how hard we had to work just to make this exist. And that's before we even started writing. And we spent those years, and we worked, and Nate would come and visit, and it was... Well, the advice I have for all you young people, do this in your 20s. Because that's when you have the energy, you have the stamina, you have the persistence Spend your 20s trying to do that extraordinary thing, trying to build something that's never been built, because that's when you can do it. I just turned 40. I could not do it today. So what happened? Neither one of us knew it would work, but we believed in it. I remember we edited a weekly newspaper in Atlanta the week before it came out on the future of nonviolence, because we had this explicit mission of trying to teach young people about nonviolent civil disobedience to ignite a new nonviolent revolution in America. That was our goal. And if you follow the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence, there's a very specific way you do it, and that means writing down your objectives before you begin. What you intend to do and what you intend for it to accomplish. And so we did, and we wrote it down. But the moment I knew it was going to work came just before March Book 1 was released. And I got a phone call from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. And he said, look, I got an advance copy of your book, and I'm calling because I wanted you to know that I read it and I gave it to my 9-year-old son, and now he's gone and he's put on his Sunday suit and he's marching around my house demanding equality for everyone. And that was it. How do you instill a social consciousness in every 9-year-old in America? There is a reason there is an attack on libraries right now. There is a reason there is an attack on curriculums right now. There's a reason there's an attack on teachers and librarians and everyone trying to raise a generation of decent and kind people. Because that is not what they want. And they know that when we educate them, when we teach them what it is to use their power as young people, they are a threat to the status quo. And they're trying to stop it. John Lewis spent the last years of his life fighting what he saw coming, which was that battle. It is not a coincidence that the last 2 speeches John Lewis gave from the stage were speeches about March. The first one was in Vermont, where they used it as a statewide reading text. And he spoke to thousands of students over 2 days. I was his backup act. That's what I did for this whole time, right? John Lewis would go first, and I would have to follow. You don't know how hard it is to follow John Lewis. Like every night, right? But I remember in Vermont, I knew he was sick. He was getting skinny. I remember the morning we started, he didn't eat his blueberry muffin. He had a sweet tooth. And that blueberry muffin was when I knew things were getting worse. But he got up that night and I could tell he was tired. And he stood in front of these thousands of people in the state of Vermont, filling up the Flynn Theater, the biggest theater in the state. And he preached. And he told them that March was the way. It was our path forward to teaching this generation. That we have to be creative, and we have to be persistent, and we have to find a way to teach this generation how another generation did it so that they can develop the skills and the talents and the ideas to do it once more, because we need them. This is the only way that we can succeed in building the new America that John Lewis spent his life fighting for. We carry on his work. We keep him alive. We do what he spent every ounce of energy doing right up until the day he died. It means a lot for you all to be here with us. Frankly, I would be here if y'all weren't here. But to see such a distinguished, as the Congress would say, y'all a good-looking group. To see you all come together to celebrate him like this. I hope you know there is the icon. There is the man they will make statues of. But there is the human being, too. And there are the blueberry muffins. There is the tie he had trouble tying because his hand from all the beatings. There's a man who threw jelly beans at us in the office when he was bored. We have to keep alive for these kids that he was real, that he was a human being that they can all emulate, that he was someone who grew up poor, who worked really hard, who believed with his whole heart in the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence, that he, as his librarian instructed him to, read everything. And so we come to this library not just to dedicate it in his name, but to carry on his work, to celebrate his legacy, and to continue building the beloved community here in America. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for celebrating my friend and my brother. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm left with a reflective spirit, thinking about all that our speaker shared, all that Andrew shared, the legacy and the humanity of John Lewis, and the challenge that it puts before us. So we are here today to celebrate the library and the naming and the legacy that the library represents, but then what do we do when we leave today? Is it just about this moment? Or how do we take this moment, and what does it mean? What does it mean to create the change that we saw John Lewis create? What does that mean in our lives? What does that mean for inspiring our students? And what does it mean for the future? So I'm thankful for all of our speakers and the power and the passion and the reflection, and particularly to have the voice of someone who, touched physically and spiritually and emotionally John Lewis here in the room, talk about that and share that experience with us. So as we close, there are some thank yous that we need to make sure to give. So first, let's start with a huge round of applause for everyone who spoke at this podium and shared a piece of themselves with us and with our library. So thank you to all of our speakers. Of course, the leadership of CREC and of Montessori Magnet School, Dr. Florio, Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Napoleon, and Ms. Leone, thank you for making this a possibility. And you've heard the names referenced throughout the program, but really the visionaries and the work behind making today a possibility. I'll start with Heather, because I've seen, just kind of working with her in preparation for today, just the amount of the commitment, the attention to detail, the execution, the passion to make sure that everything was just right, to make sure that we had this experience that we can take and move on. So thank you to Heather for that. Honestly, don't even know what to say about Joe. So we all know that today would not be possible without his vision and the depth of his commitment to the story and the legacy and bringing the humanity of John Lewis to our school community, and to our students. We wouldn't be here without him. So thank you, Joe, for everything you've done. All right, so Joe, do you want to say a few words?
I want to hear.
So I'll share one story. The day of the funeral for Congressman Lewis, one of my students, Juwan Jackson, a CREC graduate, he emailed me and he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. D, that Congressman Lewis passed away." And he said, you know, he's talked about our class and that, and he said, I'm just so honored that I was asked him questions because of Andrew. And he said, I didn't realize how much this man meant to me getting an education. And he said, this is 2020, he goes, I am graduating from Penn State this spring. And to know that you made a difference in many children's lives that you would never ever know. But that's our job, is to prepare kids for the future and to let them know, even if they're poor. Andrew knows, I know, I grew up poor like Andrew. And you need people to extend a hand to you. And Congressman Lewis is a prime example because he changes people's lives. And I know Peter's here. Peter started it with me. Just starting these Skype sessions and all that and meeting the congressman, thousands of children were affected by him. And you don't even know the impact that he had on many of our students. And I just think that's so important. I know Triopia, the same thing, your family, my students, how much they have benefited from your family and their story. And I think it's important to share these stories. It shouldn't be just a paragraph in a history book. You need to bring it to life. And that's how you get people engaged. Because when they learn about that, they want to learn more. And that's what you have to do. And, you know, as Congressman Lewis said to me, remember, Andrew, when I said I'm retired, and that was a few years ago, he goes, you can't retire. I'll end with that. Thank you.
So I know I can't give all the thank yous, but I would like to thank you all for celebrating with us and all the people who contributed to making today a reality. We do have some refreshments out in the hall. We invite you to enjoy the space. If you didn't have a chance to have an up-close look at the mural and read some of the words, enjoy the library. So our space is your space, and thank you all for coming this afternoon.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.